Today, OpenAI put out a new filter that allows your uploaded images to take on the characteristics of Studio Ghibli films, and this is something that my social media have been blowing up about all day long. People highly enraged over what they perceive as like misappropriation or stealing of an artistic style. And as a channel that has been championing using AI in creative ways and integrating into your workflow, I felt like it was something worth talking about and unpacking on this channel. I'm David Miller, multimedia artist in Los Angeles, and this is my home studio, Primordial Creative. I'm also an INFP creative, and Hayao Miyazaki, of course, is one of my patron saints. I highly respect the man and sort of look to him as a beacon of what an artist should be and could be. And, you know, in regards to AI, there's a very famous video going around where he had watched some test footage of basically like zombie mechanics, body flopping around, kind of a video game style. And the people presenting this video to Miyazaki were saying they essentially wanted to replace all the illustrators, and Miyazaki calls it creepy and he'll have nothing to do with it. And, you know, it doesn't reflect real human pain. So that video has been taken out of context in a lot of ways, where people are like, anything AI is soulless and pointless, and its only purpose is to replace creative endeavors by artists. And I don't think that's what's happening in the video. The fact that the game developers in that, I don't know if they're game developers, but you know, the people developing the mechanics of that flopping around are thinking in terms of probably like, you know, you have a video game and you have the idle animations and ways to like replicate cool things for what, of course, is a zombie flopping around that is creepy. It's intended to be creepy. That's a lot different than somebody who's trying to make an artistic movie that tells a human story in the way that Miyazaki's films did. Or an imaginative story that sort of celebrates the weirdness of dream logic, like Spirited Away. Okay? So and also Miyazaki's an old man, and he's allowed to have his preferences and his opinions on what is good and bad. It's very difficult to look at our elder statesman artists and expect them to be on board with all new technologies. You know, how many people that were film directors in the film era were cagey about adopting digital techniques. I mean, some people like Steven Spielberg adopt every new technique because maybe they had visions that could only be expressed with the new technology. But it's understandable. After a certain number of years, you know, an artist is kind of set in their ways. And unless they're totally like a vanguard visionary who also has like a lot of money to invest in new technologies or new way of doing things, they're going to kind of stick to what they know, and they're not going to be like super excited about new stuff. An artist who is, you know, what I'm talking about, somebody who's old but is always like adopting new technologies, would be somebody like Brian Eno, and he has a lot of wonderful uses for AI, including taking like his entire archive of thousands of songs and having them randomly match up and synchronize and create new things, pulling aspects of each song and like maybe they're in the same key or maybe they don't, but they blend together in a new way that he never would have generated on his own, nor does he have the time to, you know, constantly match up these disparate elements of things he's done. So that's really just like addressing Miyazaki's opinion about AI in general. And if I say anything that somebody's like, well, you're going against a living artist's wishes, you know, let's just table that for a second, okay? I think that taking an artist style and making sort of the one-click way to ape it is not new, especially because most of my background is in photography, and I saw this with like Ansel Adams style work, these epic black and white prints that are immaculate. They were shot with 4x5 and 8x10 cameras, so they're full of all this extra detail. And he made prints the size of my wall. I've seen videos of him in the darkroom making these things. He wrote technical manuals about the zone system that he came up with, I believe, and a lot of what he's accomplished, in his life in the early 1900s is something that you can do with one or two clicks of a button today. Between the cameras that we can purchase and carry with us and not have to haul a whole pack up a hill or pull out of the trunk of our car, whatever, to the fact that HDR technology and sharpening technology and panoramic blending, all those things make it very reasonable and feasible for somebody to make Ansel Adams style images with none of the years of practice or pain or investment. It's just possible. Are all of those photos great? Do they touch you like Ansel Adams stuff? I don't know, and I've gotten to the point where I realize it doesn't really matter, because the original Star Wars means something to me, and the modern Star Wars doesn't. It means nothing it's just another product. But does that mean the only good Star Wars is the stuff that George Lucas touched? No, because he made the worst Star Wars stuff, the prequels. It is really hard to come up with an ethical set of standards to apply to art that fit every single scenario. A lot of times I'll talk about originality and the creativity continuum, and I'll bring up somebody like Guillermo del Toro, a very visionary artist, one of my heroes too, and he's made Pinocchio, Frankenstein, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. He made two comic book movies, two Hellboys and one Blade 2. Pacific Rim is just like Ultraman updated, and things like Crimson Peak and Nightmare Alley are essentially takes on genre, pre-existing books in Nightmare Alley's case, and also Mimic was a short story. So it's like Hayao Miyazaki, his first directorial debut was The Castle of Cagliostro, which was a Lupin III Monkey Punch creation, and Monkey Punch based Lupin III on this French gentleman thief character from 1905 or whenever. So that element of what's like unique, special, creative, you kind of have to forget about that when you're talking about technological advances or what people are putting out in the world. Because as original as you think everybody that you admire is, you're going to find some source material that they synthesize with another part of their biography or another part of an alternate take on it, and a lot of times it's technology that allowed that alternate take to take place, or something like legalism. Alan Moore famously took the Charlton characters and remixed them for Watchmen. He was basically asked to, because he wasn't allowed to use the Charlton characters when he wanted to. And he has things like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which are all public domain characters. Essentially, I think there might be a few that are sort of slipped in under the radar. But Alan Moore takes issue with his remixed Watchmen being made into new iterations, and kind of seems oblivious to things like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen or Top 10 or Working on Supreme or other things that are very clearly drawn from adjacent source material. And by another token, I think I was a huge fan of Spider-Man growing up until I realized they were just going to sort of retell the same stories over and over for new generations, or every 4 years. He fights the same villains. He has the same threats. Aunt May is injured. Aunt May is dead. Aunt May was alive. They know the secret. It's just kind of monotonous, and you realize, okay, this is a soap opera that repeats. I'm going to check out. And then along comes the Spider-Verse movies, which are based on all these iterations of Spider-Man, focusing on Miles Morales, but a character I've never even read in the comics. But the Spider-Verse movies are corporate. They are based on pre-existing pop IP. And they're some of the most boundary-pushing pieces of literal fine art that you can come across, from at least things that broke through the public consciousness in the last 10 years. Maybe in the 21st century. I think that those will be gold standard movies for a long, long, long time. They changed the way animated films can look, can feel, can sound, the depth of their storytelling, the amount of heart that's within them. And from that, you can say that about a lot of the Studio Ghibli work, particularly the Miyazaki films. And I mean Hayao Miyazaki, I do not mean his son Goro. If I were to make a video that ranked how I felt about Ghibli films, Goro's films would be on the bottom. I'm talking about Tales of Earthsea. I'm talking about the one involving the witch that I hated so much that I forgot the name of it. I'm talking about that TV show, Rona, on Amazon, which I watched with my kids when they were young, and I just stared at it. I'm like, this animation is kind of interesting. It's a little different. It looks borderline cheap. And Earwig and the Witch is the one I'm thinking of. When we went and saw that in the theater during pandemic times, it was only us in the theater, and I was stunned at how bad the physics were of that, because it is a CGI Ghibli film. It felt like when Red Letter Media watched some 1990s knockoff of Toy Story, or some silly bootleg toy thing that you could get in a dollar bin, when DVDs used to have dollar bins in Dollar Tree stores, whatever, Walmart. That Earwig and the Witch was awful. And it came out from Ghibli, has the Ghibli name on it. Somebody thought it was up to snuff. It's from Miyazaki's son, Goro, who probably wanted to take his own path. I believe he was an architect at one point, and then his father's a legend, so he's got to follow in the footsteps of his father. I just, it's such a mix-up of where style comes from, how valuable it is. Is it offensive when things are borrowed and remixed? Now, let's talk about it being a filter from a tech company, the Ghibli filter. I think a lot of filters and sort of like instantaneous art stuff that's like an A to B thing with nothing added in between, I think that maybe catches attention for a day or a week, and then it falls away. I'm reminded of when people had an app that would put you in like high school photos or something. Like if you were in yearbook photos in the 80s, and for a week I would like scroll through my stories and I would see that constantly show up, and then it went away. Why did it go away? Because there wasn't much more to it than the gag, I remember when people used to do boomerangs in their Instagram stories or have questions, and like NGL, not gonna lie, they had those things in the stories. They stuck around and then they went away. Why did they go away? Because one, they were gags and everybody was kind of used to it and it wasn't eye-catching anymore, and also because engagement, it peaked when people used that stuff, and then it went down because it fell out of favor. So that you can see news photos that we're familiar with, like Trump getting shot in the ear and whatever, done Studio Ghibli style. Today, it's interesting. Tomorrow, I've already seen it. I'm over it. Maybe a year from now, you're like, what? What is this? Somewhere in the world, though, somebody will look at this and say, well, maybe something cool can be made out of this. You know what I mean? They'll make more than just an image. They'll make a series, and it'll have that Ghibli aspect to it, but it will be a different animal entirely, because when I think of Studio Ghibli, and by the way, I have Moro the wolf on my leg as a tattoo. So I have Ghibli permanently, from Princess Mononoke, permanently affixed to my leg. And my other tattoo from a filmmaker is Black Phillip, the goat from The Witch, Robert Eggers' film. And they're both on the same leg, and they're both done by the same tattoo artist, Mackenzie Eccles. Anywho, when I think of a Ghibli film, it isn't just, the big eyes and the face shape. And you could watch a bunch of the Miyazaki ones and recognize, the same kind of character design throughout. You could see some old woman in Porco Rosso and recognize her as all these other films. Like, it's a similar aesthetic, but the pacing of the film, the kind of stories that are told, the dialogue, the music, it's all what makes those films what they are. And you could change a few of those things and it would feel completely different. Much in the same way, the style that we appreciate of manga, basically, even though there was Japanese illustration for centuries, what you kind of recognize as modern anime and manga was the passing of Betty Boop and other kinds of early American cartoons that made their way into post-war Japan when it was occupied. And then Tezuka started, he had Astro Boy and you had Speed Racer, and it was like a synthesis of all these art styles cross-pollinating. And the aesthetics of Japanese culture absorbing American stuff, which is probably borrowed from something else. And don't get too upset out there if you are an artist and you think you're waking up in a world where your signature style can be instantly ripped off and regurgitated, and all of the hard work you've done and everything that you put into your art is now invalidated because of it. That is not the case. That is not what's happening. What is happening is that a tech company that makes AI the way that tech companies think, and Brian Eno said this better than I, but I'm trying to paraphrase, is that they want to replicate what is popular, what is in demand, what will, get their technological invention to a mass audience, because it's not really worth their time and money and investment to make it towards a niche audience. So what the tech company mind is like, absorb all that's popular. One of the first things you could do in After Effects or whatever is have lightsaber duels, Star Wars laser effects, things like that. The artist takes the tool and says, how can I make it mine? How can I integrate it organically with my process? How can this make me accomplish things or allow me to accomplish things that I wasn't able to accomplish before? So I know for me, speaking of ripping off an anime artist's style, I have a music video that's coming out sometime the next month, and it has such obvious influence of Akira Toriyama and Dragon Ball Z, from characters' looks to their power-ups to all these things. It is a tribute to DBZ and maybe how the original Dragon Ball and the early DBZ made me feel when I was my late teens and early 20s. That like pure idealistic feel that a lot of us get from the idea of Superman or something like that. And that's all it is. It doesn't go any further. I'm not making my own version of Dragon Ball Z, but if I ended up making a fan fic or a fan comic or a remix of something like Dragon Ball, I can think of a lot of people who also, sunk their creative teeth into a favorite IP and were able to like spin it into something new or make their own things. I already mentioned Guillermo del Toro and Alan Moore, of course, but you have Michel Fife's Copra, which is basically Suicide Squad, but also incorporating all the other early 90s, late 80s kind of comics. He and I have the same exact influences. So I've seen like his version of The Punisher, Doctor Strange, The Reavers, all these like things that are just welded into his brain. Ed Piskor, rest his soul. Things like Hip Hop Family Tree, X-Men Grand Design, everything Tom Scioli makes, comics-wise. You have the aforementioned Spider-Verse films. You have people who created, Star Wars and Star Trek fan films that are the equivalent, technically, of a lot of what Hollywood has been making. And now that they get their experience making those, they can work on more original IP. I just watched Nosferatu, Robert Eggers' film. It's the remix world, the collage world is not a bad thing. And I don't think Hayao Miyazaki is going to die or be any less wealthy because of what OpenAI has done. You don't have to like it. That doesn't mean that the technology is inherently corrupting and ruining everything and destroying artists' lives. I mean, this is just the continuing evolution of technology, culture, creativity. I am sure the person who hates AI the most, someone clever and smart and soulful enough will make something that they will love, not knowing it's made with AI, and then they'll hear it's made with AI and it'll like, oh, instant, they're instantly gonna flip because of the tool, which I think is a very human thing, to be honest. Humans are very inconsistent with their morals. If they like something, they'll ignore aspects they consider negative. If they like Led Zeppelin's music, and then they're like, well, Led Zeppelin borrowed all these riffs and these things from these old black musicians, these bluesmen, who, by the way, were also borrowing from everybody else. But they like Led Zeppelin's music, they'll be like, oh, that's great, or Radiohead. Radiohead's so creative and popular, but Creep might have been the Hollies song. But Radiohead generally is creative, so we're going to totally overlook that, while somebody else who's a big fan of the Hollies is like, how could they just steal their entire career away from them? Tom York. Anyways, that's my take on the Ghibli OpenAI kerfuffle of today. Hopefully it'll be a different kerfuffle tomorrow. Maybe it'll be something that's more relevant to the survival of the human species. But, probably not. Best of luck in your own creative endeavors. Talk to you next time.